Good morning. The title of today's talk will be Inclusivity in the Metaverse, Opportunities, Potential and Safety. Is this working? Hi. As you've just been introduced, my name is Helen Davis and I'm a research fellow at the University of South Wales and freelance R&D co-producer specialising in audience research and user experience. While my undergraduate and master's degree sit within the more traditional kind of social sciences, 12 years ago I had the opportunity to work on an innovative knowledge transfer partnership, a scheme supported by the UK government that fosters collaborative working between academic institutions and industry. While these kind of collaborations are commonplace within the fields of biomedical science, engineering, this was the first of its kind within the creative industries that looked specifically at audiences and users. The aim of my research project was to gain a better understanding of audience engagement with Welsh language media by young bilingual tweens, so kids aged between 7 and 12. So just to give a bit of context, Wales makes up part of the UK and it has one of the oldest spoken languages in Europe. It's a Celtic language spoken by around 20% of the population. This once endangered language has seen a huge revival since the 1980s, and it's now estimated that around 40% of the population under the age of 25 can speak Welsh. A lot of what language maintenance campaign and growth success can be attributed to a progressive educational policy and also huge investment in media. As of 2011, the Welsh language was given official status, meaning that it's one of the only countries in the UK with two official languages, so English and Welsh. This KTP research later became the focus of my PhD, and since then, I've worked on numerous collaborative research projects as both an academic and R&D consultant. And a lot of my work has looked at the importance of language equitability across a range of media. In 2019, I began working with Sugar, and a creative consortium they were part of on an AR Audience of the Future demonstrator project. And since then, I continue to work with Sugar on a multitude of projects. And this is where I should be introducing you to Will Humphrey, Creative Director of Sugar Creative, and recently named in the 2022 British Interactive Media Association Top 100 Tech Innovators in the UK. But unfortunately, he's unwell, so he was unable to join me. So, like I mentioned, I work for the University of South Wales. It's one of Britain's most exciting and ambitious universities. Innovative, thriving and sustainable, we work to build better futures for our students, our communities and our partners, economically, socially and culturally. We've recently found out that the Faculty of Creative Industries, or FCI, at USW was ranked 16th in the Power Rankings across the whole of the UK, based on the results of the Research Excellence Framework. So REF is conducted once every 6 or 7 years and is the way in which universities in the UK are ranked based on their research contributions. 75% of the research in the creative industries at USW rated world-leading and internationally excellent. So FCI is now one of the university's flagship faculties in terms of research, and much of this is down to the extent of the collaborative project that we've been involved with. So, as I mentioned, one of our collaborators, and who Will is part of the team, is Sugar Creative. Sugar is a company that creates industry-leading, cutting-edge, single and multi-user digital experiences for brands and organizations worldwide. Sugar create innovation-focused projects for education, medical entertainment and culture. Their clients include animation royalty Aardman, Ubisoft, the BBC and the Welsh and UK government, to just name a few. You can see from the screen a couple of examples of these, including the recent work with Aardman on the immersive storytelling platform featuring the beloved Wallace and Gromit. So, now that I've given you the hard sell on who we are at USW and Sugar Creative, what are we going to be talking about today? So, what can we deliver within the next generation of experiences and events? How utilising the metaverse can benefit telling cultural narratives? And alongside inclusion, we need to ensure safety in the metaverse. And how do we meaningfully address the challenges of making content that is truly inclusive? So, What can we deliver to the next generation? What is possible to realise is partly rooted in what is technically possible. There have been some brilliant advances that allow for incredible tools at our disposal. You can see on screen a couple of these from recent sugar projects. Through machine learning, we can place digital content that reacts to real-world objects or to real-world location based on GPS and SDKs from Niantic. The digital content itself is able to not just be placed, but through SLAM and LiDAR to know and understand the real world around it. And with VR, we are now able to move beyond controllers with seamless hand tracking that makes interaction that much more real. However, technical delivery is only one strand of innovation. A further crucial element is the collaborative learning process between academia and industry. So much of the work that I've been involved with Sugar has been focused on embedding audience and user research in both the design and the development of their projects. When I first started working with Sugar and the creative consortium behind the Wallace and Gromit project, I was met with some initial reluctance. Some of the common tensions that arise between university-industry collaborations include different expectations, assumptions, and languages, as well as divergent motivations, leading to potential tensions between a cultural enrichment ethos, traditionally prized by universities, and the drive for commercial profits, so important to industry. These potential tensions are compounded by conflicting publication drives that seem to work at odds with one another. So universities focus on kind of like big picture views versus a tendency amongst industry to focus on solving the problem directly in front of them. In academia, we also must adhere to rigorous ethical considerations. So finding the balance is really tricky. But we did manage to do this, and I was able to encourage the team to think about utilising non-tech-based research methodologies to provide users an alternative mode of communication or expression. The focus does not always have to be centred on the user experience of the technology. Understanding their needs as individuals, their lived experiences, is an essential part of the creative process and central to how we approach the question of inclusivity in the metaverse. I'll come back to that a little bit later, but just bear that in mind. So, how utilising the Metaverse can benefit telling cultural narratives? One way in which the Metaverse can do this is by giving voice to the important different interpretations of historical content. This allows for stories of marginalised cultures to be told like never before. A specific example of this is with Project Arall meaning other in Welsh, and that is a direct translation, a partnership between Sugar Creative and the National Museum Wales, and supported by funding through Cluster, which is where I come into it through the university. The project will use object recognition and augmented reality to show how objects in the museum's collection are perceived by different people. The user is able to see these reactions placed as part of the objects and move between them to create a shifting empathy and understanding of how history is not fixed. This is driven by the museum's decolonisation committee, and we aim to have the prototype ready by late summer. The Metaverse can also allow for historic cultural narratives to be rooted in place through harnessing the geolocations I mentioned earlier. A specific example of this is Project Alfred, in which historic game content is brought to life. The upcoming project, in partnership with HCT, Ubisoft, and Sugar Creative, aims to bring the world of Assassin's Creed's Valhalla to life with city scale using augmented reality for the first time. This can go beyond the factual by routing story to place. We have the almost limitless potential to give voice to underrepresented narratives. Finally, we can't talk of culture without mentioning language. As Khaled Hosseini puts it, if culture was a house, then language would be the key to the front door and to all the rooms inside. If we are to strive for a more inclusive metaverse, it's essential that we start from language equitability and that the potential of minority and marginalised language is realised when giving voice to cultures. When I talk of language equitability, I don't just mean the mechanics of translation. We need to understand the cultural and historical nuances behind the language. The word displayed on the screen, hiraeth, is a Welsh word with no direct English translation. And by that, I mean there is no single word in the English language that means exactly the same as hiraeth. When I think of how far machine learning has come in terms of translation, it's phenomenal. But if you drop hiraeth into Google Translate, what you get back in English is the word longing. It's not totally incorrect because it is a type of longing. but it does not address the cultural complexities and the emotional charge embedded in the word. This is just an anecdotal example, but I hope you kind of understand what I'm trying to get across here. When you see your language being represented correctly in a space, it's empowering. As a speaker of minoritized language, I know firsthand the difficulties facing lesser used, minority or endangered language communities. The Metaverse has the potential to provide a global platform where language can be learned, maintained, and more importantly, visible, empowering speakers and encouraging learning. So how do we meaningfully address the challenges of making content that is truly inclusive? For us, one of the ways in which we've addressed the challenges of making truly inclusive content is through co-creation alongside those with lived experience. Understanding the needs of different communities at every stage of the project and being willing to listen to input in a range of forms and formats. So again, if I use the Wallace and Gromit example, the reason for doing this is because the university had a very active part of this. It was part of the consortium, and R&D was very much at the heart of the project, and it was part of the project's remit. So, as opposed to focusing solely on user testing, the team collaborated to devise a layered methodology that was considerate of the research participants. A series of research sessions were undertaken using a combination of traditional research methodologies, namely focus groups, semi-structured interviews, and task-based research sessions, with industry-led user experience and user testing. Each session had task-based activities tailored to the different groups. I'll run through a few of them now just to kind of give you an understanding of what I'm talking about. So we conducted sessions with families to gain a better understanding of how different generations interact with AR. For these sessions, we used Wallace and Gromit visual aids, namely a showreel of clips from previous films. This was done to bring together the feeling of nostalgia from the older generations while introducing the younger generations to the characters and the next chapter in the story. It was like a kind of narrative bridge. This was followed by focus groups, discussions, and then app demonstrations to gain a better understanding of how family demographics kind of interact with augmented reality. We also ran sessions with small groups of neurodivergent students from USW. A similar approach was taken with these sessions, but we flipped the order in which we ran the sessions. The visual aids were used as more of an icebreaker, and the footage we used kind of showed the mechanics behind what we were doing as opposed to just kind of footage from the films. We had a number of dyslexic and dyspraxic students in the groups, so we were really kind of interested in understanding how the interface worked for them, where more audio instructions perhaps were needed, how the colour palette worked for them, and also how AR works for those with spatial difficulties, where were really important areas that we wanted to explore. We also conducted research sessions with secondary schools kids in Bristol to gain a better understanding of the importance of in-game and in-app avatars. We were particularly interested in understanding how young people from different ethnic backgrounds navigated avatars in general, and also how they felt about Wallace and Gromit. These characters are very much part of the Bristol landscape. They sponsor a ward at the Children's Hospital, and there've been Wallace and Gromit trails set up across the city for years. But how relatable are these characters, and how important was it for them to see versions of themselves in these stories? Here we utilised a creative research methodology to encourage the children to create their own avatars, using printed assets, eyes, ears, nose, etc. You can see them on the side there, in the Wallace and Gromit style. Acetates and pens were also available so that the children could customise their avatars. We had kids putting hijabs and glasses. One kid even gave his avatar horns. We had loads of different things. And some of them even wanted to look like Gromit the dog. From a research perspective, the use of task-based activities allowed for more creative expression and transformed the power dynamics between the researcher and the young participants. So, yeah, like I mentioned, these were some of the ones that came out of the sessions. Not only were these sessions insightful for the research team, but during our weekly stand-ups, we were able to share the research findings with the wider team. And what we found was a change in attitude and approach. Different teams began coming to us with specific questions, questions around visual impairments, questions about how accessible the font was for dyslexia. So these were coming directly from the teams involved. Another example can be seen in an expansion of one of Sugar's VR story engines, Project V, where they are combining immersive story content with British Sign Language. By creating a system of hands and facial capture alongside members of the sign language community, they will be able to give language equitability to BSL in the VR experience. Alongside inclusion, we need to ensure safety in the metaverse. With more potential for affecting stories, we need to be mindful of the impact it can have on the viewer. The key to this is the elective interaction, and forewarnings are central to safety within this. One of Will's favourite examples is the I can't remember what they call it, the spider slider, I think it's called. So from the game Grounded by Obsidian Entertainment, inspired by the desire to allow those with arachnophobia to play, it lets you set the level of spideriness from complete to unthreatening orb. You can see in the bottom there. Physical metaverse hybridization, be it in AR or VR, also carries a duty of care. This ranges from alerting people to physical dangers in AR and providing the ability to enforce physical boundaries in virtual spaces. This is an interesting example of a small stampede that happened in South Korea when a rare Pokemon was spotted. The increasing depth of content should be balanced with consideration of the increase in noise and the effect this has on those with mental health needs. Personalization potential of digital environments is central to this. So just to kind of conclude, collaborative working with academic institutions can provide access to expertise and open up networks to people, human beings, not just users. This is not always an easy task, and these relationships can at times be fraught. Often my role is to ask the difficult questions, but what I'm seeing more and more is a change of culture within the companies I collaborate with. When a company is willing to invest time and resource into making their product more ethical and more inclusive, it sends a positive message, not just to the users, but also to the employees, that they are part of something bigger. Through outward-facing engagement at different stages of the design process and by learning from others' lived experience, I believe we can build a more considerate and inclusive metaverse. Any questions?
All right. Thank you so much. My goodness. Hirath, is that how we say that?
Hiraeth.
Hiraeth. I love that word. I'm gonna learn that word.
There you go.
Would anyone like to ask a question? There must be some questions. Okay, go ahead. Come on up. I think this mic.
Is this good?
Hi.
I think you can hear me.
I can hear you okay.
Yeah, so as a dyslexic thinker myself, who's navigated the academic environment my entire life to ultimately become a professor, through this, how have you seen this dyslexic thinking, if you will, from the children in a world that is preoccupied by answers versus just communication and management? Oftentimes I say in education, most students go on the highway. I take the scenic route. What was your observations of the dyslexic thinkers in particular that you've seen and how they've engaged in the media?
Well, it was really fascinating because I think for us, we were really focused, for the team, they were really focused on understanding the technology behind it, how we make the work that we were working on accessible by using fonts. So it was more kind of like font-based because of the application, but also it kind of led us to start thinking beyond just dyslexia. We were thinking, well, and I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at. It was this notion that it had a knock-on effect into other areas. So we were really keen on understanding how perhaps enabling one group also enabled others. So it was really important for us, but I guess it was really important for us to kind of include more audio in the application. So this is a kind of like, it's a game that you play, but it's also, it's about storytelling in the digital world. But I think allowing the students to have a voice and to talk about their dyslexia was also incredibly empowering for them. It gave them a different kind of confidence that I'd not seen before. I taught some of these students myself, and actually it was something, their dyslexia was just something that they cracked on with. where this was the first time that somebody was speaking to them about it and giving them a platform to talk about it and to talk about the difficulties. And again, I kind of go back to the word empowering. That's definitely what an inclusive metaverse can allow for.
Well, let me first say that this is an amazing talk, and I have so many questions I don't know where to start. But I think the big one for me is oftentimes we find that, especially when it comes to VR and AR, people with disabilities can't even kind of participate to begin with because a lot of the underlying technologies just aren't made accessible. And so I would really love to hear more in your experience where you found kind of those levels of barriers and what you did in response.
So, completely great question, thank you. Strangely enough, COVID allowed us to kind of take a different route with this. It's strange, I mean, perhaps more so with AR, we actually found that taking it to people's homes, the concept, I should explain, initially was to allow people to use the app, and at the end of the 30-day story window, there would be a big event held in Bristol where people would physically go to. So that was great when the idea was formed. But then COVID struck and everything went online, even the way that we conducted the research. And actually what we found was we were opening up the research to people who perhaps wouldn't have been on the radar beforehand, people with physical disabilities who couldn't come to sessions. So we used Look Back for that, and it worked really well. Also, it meant that we were conducting the research in people's homes where they felt comfortable, where they could show us the different elements of what made their engagement with AR/VR that much more difficult. And as COVID kind of wasn't going anywhere, the event then moved online. So in a kind of turn of events, we created an inclusive event in a space that was comfortable to those taking part, which, you know, I mean, I'm not saying that, but basically COVID opened a door to us that we hadn't thought about. You know, while COVID was going on, it was just such a horrible time. But it did open many avenues for us, and we were able to kind of like really investigate that further. Does that answer your question? Do you want me to? Yeah? Okay.